Okay, so what I want to do is look at a couple of things. I want to look at um, many-to-many relationships. I want to look at instance methods. And again, the idea when you're doing SQLize that you have to go and set up an Express server and pipeline and listening is really not that true at all. And again, good exercise if you're doing this stuff to just set up a directory. And let's call this, let's call it story tags, okay? We sort of looked at this way back at some point where a story could have multiple tags. So let's create story tags SQLize demo and go into it. And let me do an npm init. And if we wanted to, don't even have to worry about looking at our package JSON file. Let's just pretend that we have a nodemon running with server.js. And it's going to tell us that it can't find our server. Let's open this up. And we know we're going to need a couple of things here. So let's do an npm install of SQLize. You always need SQLize. And again, SQLize is wrapping around another node module. So since we're wrapping around Postgres, we're going to use Postgres. We're going to save it. Okay, I'm going to open this up. Find it here. And what I'm going to do is start working right off this file. So I'm going to add my server.js. Okay? So again, even though in the end we're going to build an Express app, start off light. You don't have to do Express. Has a couple of different moving parts. You know about that. This is a lot easier. So we'll go over here and we'll specify that we're going to bring in SQLize. We bring that in with an uppercase out of convention because it's actually a constructor. And we're going to set up our DB object by saying new SQLize. And let's just for now, let's just hard code this. Okay. Eventually, this is going to be an environment variable. For the moment, we could hard code it. We're going to say localhost. And this is going to be story tags. We'll just call it story tags demo. And we're going to go over here. There's going to be a couple of models that we're going to set up. But we can imagine right off the bat, if we wanted to do this, we would have a story. And the way that we end up doing this is with the define. Now, if you want to, you could do uppercase for your table names. I've seen it both ways. I just sort of got used to lowercase because if you work in the Postgres command line, it's kind of funny with uppercase values. It makes you quote them. But we can do it this way too if you want. It doesn't really matter, I don't think, one way or the other. And if we go over here, we're going to now define our object. In fact, we can just keep this empty at the moment. And if we end up doing this, nothing would prevent us from saying db.sync force is true. Now, what's going to happen when we do that? Who wants to take a guess what's going to happen? What do you think? Huh? Get an error, but what happens with an error within a promise chain if you don't handle it? This is actually in one of the slides. Yeah, so you get an error, right? Unhandled rejection, right? By the way, this won't solve our error, but if we wanted to, we end up putting a catch here. And we could end up doing that. And we'll get our error, but this time our error is going to be spread out, right? Message, database, story tags, demo does not exist. So let's create that database. I think I have a Postgres open. So I'm going to say create database story tags demo. And I'll go over here, and just by going in here and modifying this file. By the way, well, for this it doesn't matter. But let's say that we were going to have this as a function. We were going to export it, so we would have something like const sync. We always want to remember that if we're syncing something, right, we're going to want to return a promise, which would be db sync force true, right? And if we did that and we wanted to call that, we would call just sync on it, right? And again, I could go here and catch an exception, or better yet, assuming that this was in this file, could go over here and put this on multiple lines, and we could do a return and we could go over here and say force true and do a catch e console.log e. I mentioned this before, but just so everyone understands. And again, I could call sync. What would be the problem with putting my catch in here? You remember?
What happens, you may not want to catch it there. You may want to catch it where, like, at a
Where,
route, maybe,
or where I'm calling it.
where I'm calling it from, so that you can really see what's going on. And
Yeah.
where it's coming from.
Yeah, the problem with this is that if I ended up doing that and I caught this error here, then if I were using sync over here with a then, okay, even though I ended up catching that error, I basically, what I'm doing here is swallowing up my error, which is fine. If you want to deal with the error there, then put the error there, right? But if you don't want to deal with the error there, you don't have to catch every error. You could basically say, look, this is a promise. Whoever is using it, deal with the exception, okay? So just be aware of that. Don't go catch crazy, okay? Think optimistically, right, that things are going to work out. If someone wants to catch the errors, I mean, what you don't want to do is overdo it so that you're catching errors. You're swallowing up errors. So I'm going to take this out here. And at this point, if we put a then here, console.log, synced. And let's see what happens. We're synced if this is the right port. And if we go and connect to story tags demo, and I do a D. So if I say select star from stories, okay? So this is Postgres, right? That's why I try to avoid the capital letters here. People do it. It's not the end of the world. All you have to do, and again, this is only when you're running the console from stories. It bothers me. I would rather deal with lower cases. It drives me a little bit bananas. So I try to name my, even my foreign keys. You really could run into the same thing. So I'm going to switch this. And again, we know that it ends up pluralizing it. And now if we do this, we'll see that we have actually both of them. It's kind of annoying. I would think it would obliterate the database. DB sync force true. Yeah, probably. But I would think it would blow out the database, but I guess not. That's interesting. Drop table stories. Yeah, it's not thinking that there's two models. This doesn't, force actually will recreate old tables and add new tables, but I guess it doesn't delete old tables. Interesting, I didn't even realize that. So we're gonna have a story, and let's go over here, and we can do many-to-many as well, but let's just say that a story has a name. And let's, again, just keep it simple. If we do that, now we see that we have a name column here. So let's say that we also have a user. And again, we're going to have user. So this is what I was getting at before, is that if you go over here and you say console.log db.models, you're not going to see these in uppercase. You'll see them in lowercase because we're defining them with lowercase. Okay? When I export them, I like to export them as uppercase because then it's a clear sign to me that this is the big model. This is pointing really to the equivalent of the table itself as opposed to a row. So again, if we do this, we've got story and user. So let's set up some data here. What we could end up doing is that we could have another const, which is seeding our data. And we could go over here and let's create 2 users. So we'll go here and we'll say promise.all takes an array, user create, and let's put this on separate lines. So promise.all takes a collection of promises. And we'll go over here and we'll use our Mitch guy here. Okay? And so we're going to do a return on this when we end up going to seed our data. And instead of syncing, let's seed. Okay? And by the way, if we're going to seed, let's actually be a little bit careful here. When we're going to seed, let's actually sync. Then we'll go over here. In which case we're syncing, and then we are seeding. Okay? So again, if we want to seed our data, we're basically going to recreate our tables. We could run these separately. Okay? Again, you would probably, in your environment, if you had a lot of data in the database, you might not want to wipe it out. So you might have environment variables that specify when you're going to end up syncing and when you're going to end up seeding your data. For us, we'll do when the application restarts. And if we go over here and do this, and we actually look at what our result is, and we say console.log result, we could go over here, and we'll see that we get, all this stuff. I mean, in essence, what these are 2 sequelized objects. So if we went over here and we said result, not get, I don't think is going to work here because I have a collection. Okay? I don't think. It might. Yeah, so the get's not going to work there. But if I do 0, which is going to be me, that should show you me. Right? And if I do this, 1, that'll end up showing Mitch. Okay? So promise.all ends up resolving itself. So let's also go over here and we'll start thinking about our stories. Let's actually put them in this order before we end up getting to a many-to-many. So one of the things we could end up doing here is that we could specify that a story belongs to a user, right? A user writes a story. Could be different too, right? We could say that we wanted to have a relationship that a user had only one story associated with them. We could say that a user belongs to a story. But let's say that a user is going to be writing the story. There's a couple of things I want to point out. What we could do here is we could say user story belongs to user. Okay? Once we end up doing that, what that does is that if we go back here and I look at my Postgres and I describe my stories, I'll see that my stories has a user ID. And it also means that my story has a user as well. Again, it might not be populated. What this allows me to do is that when I do promise.all, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put another then here. Then, and this is going to be my result. Let me show you something interesting. I don't know if promises, the out-of-the-box promise library, has what's called a spread operator. What the spread operator allows you to do is basically say, hey, look, we know that there's multiple things that are resolved here. Could you separate them for me? Could you let me access them as Prof and Mitch? Okay? Now, what should happen here is, again, I don't think that there's support for that. So I end up getting this error, and this error is telling me cannot read property 1 of undefined, okay, which is probably a result of the fact that I'm never, well, shouldn't really say that. Let's actually just see what happens here. Instead of putting our then here, let me take this out. And when I do spread, let's just see if spread works on its own. So spread might be implemented. If I say console.log prof.get, I get prof, and I get Mitch. So this is kind of a helpful thing. Spread basically takes multiple promises and allows us to pull them apart. Okay? Again, behind the scenes, it's looking at your array and basically passing them sequentially into these two variables.
It's pulling them apart by, well, you only had one variable. So where do you have multiple?
Multiple what?
Like you have name, but there's a bunch of elements in that record. This promise, you create a name.
Has nothing to do with the attributes.
Oh, does it?
No. It has to do with the fact that I've got one promise and I've got another promise. And I'm handling these two promises. If I go in here and I put foo in here, and I do console.log foo, it's going to just tell me foo is undefined. Okay? It just basically allows me to say, hey, look, there's multiple things there. Instead of doing a then and having to deal with them as an array,
You could have said foo in the first argument.
and then I would have gotten prof. Yeah.
That's where I misunderstood.
So here,
Okay.
instead of dealing with them as an array syntax, spread is helpful. By the way, I didn't realize that this was implemented. I was going to think maybe I had to bring in Bluebird in order to get that to work, which is, again, another library that has some additional features. And I'll go over here and I'll say Prof and Mitch. And what this should allow me to do is now I'm going to add a story for myself. So I'm going to go over here and I'll say return, and I'll specify that I'm going to say story.create. And I'm going to say name is going to be my foo story. And I'll say the user ID, because again, that's what you end up getting when you do that relationship, is going to be prof ID. And if I do that, and I put a then here, and I get a story back, I could say console.log story.get. Okay? Which is my story that's here. Okay? Now I want to show you something interesting. We say that a story belongs to a user. Let's say that, I know it belongs to a user, but let's say that I don't want to call it user. I want to call it author. Okay? One of the things, you really have control over this. Again, by default, it says, okay, it's the user model. I'm going to take the ID from the user table. That's going to be the foreign key. I'm going to call it user ID. If for whatever reason I wanted to use underscores, let me just see if I get this right. Let's say I really want to be in control of my database, and I want to say that a story belongs to a user. I think I could even say foreign, kind of guessing now. The foreign key is going to be user underscore ID. I don't know if that's going to work. Let's see. Let's just see if that change the database here. D stories. Okay. So let's actually see if it is foreign key, which maybe would make a little bit more sense. Yeah, so what that gives me, this gives me a little bit more control. So this says, hey, look, you know what? I hate upper and lower case. I don't want to deal with upper and lower case with my database. I can get around that by specifying, yes, it belongs to a user, but the foreign key that I want you to use is going to be user ID, in which case, if I go over here, I would need to put in user ID to really have that relationship work. And I could always prove that it's working by doing what? Well, if I have my story and I return, let's say, story, find by ID, and I'll find by ID story.id. And then if I want to include the user themselves, include user should now get me that complete object. So what that's going to end up doing is then, again, I'm just going to get the same story back. But what I should end up getting here is not just the story, but it will also end up doing the join. And if I say console.log story.user.get,
Spell console.
thank you. So now if I do that, I will get myself. Now, a couple of things here. Let's just say that I don't want to call it a user. One of the things that SQLize allows me to do is says, all right, it's a user object. You don't want to call it a user. Call it what you want. And I say, really, what I want to do is call it an author. Okay? Now, a couple of things are going to happen here. Let me first of all take this out. And I'm going to take this out as well, because that's going to break. If I ended up doing that, okay, and I go back and I say, select star from stories, I'll see my story, but it's not affiliated with me. But notice that my foreign key is now author ID. Okay? Again, I have the ability to specify, yeah, the model is going to be user, okay? But I want to call it author. And it goes and says, okay, that's fine. We'll set up the relationships, but your foreign key is no longer going to be user ID. It's going to be author ID. And if you want to do that, that's fine. But just make sure that when you end up doing that, you end up doing author ID, okay? We could also make a case is maybe a story has an author. Maybe a story also has an editor, right? It's possible. Two foreign keys in the same table. In which case, we could go over here. Never get that as much as I'd like to. We could go over here and we could do the same thing, and we could say, look, you know, it also has an editor. In which case, if we went here and we said the author ID is prof, Mitch would make a good editor, I think, right? Mitch? You know what? He always says the right thing. That's what I love about this guy. So I go over here, okay? And this allows me to say now, again, it's going to be my editor ID is going to be Mitch ID. Once I do that, if if I say select star from stories, okay, I'll see the author ID is 1, the editor ID is 2. But it changes something a little bit, okay? And this I think makes sense. Imagine now that I go back here and I try to do this. And I say I want to include the user. You can imagine it doesn't know what to do. It says, by default, it's saying, all right, user, there must be a user associated to it by default, okay? It's stuck. Remember I told you that this is the equivalent of model user? It's still going to break, right? Still breaks, okay? But if I say, hey, look, model user, and I specify, no, listen, it's not my editor, it's my author. I want the author. Now I've got the author, and look, you can see the join here, that it's getting the authors. In fact, you could always go back here. See, notice, by the way, how it just puts quotes on everything here. You can always go back in, select this, and see your results. Okay? And you could see, here I am, here's prof over here. I could also go over here and say, hey, look, by the way, you know what? I don't just want my author. I want to get my editor as well. And now, if I go and do that, I'll see an even bigger SQL statement. Anyone want to write that statement on their own? Not that hard, but you know what? You got better things to do with your time. And I go back here, paste this. I'll see I've got Mitch, and I've got me as well. So the point that I'm getting at here is that, it's totally fine to use the defaults, but if you want to call it author, call it author. Nothing wrong with doing that. Again, what would that buy me? Well, now I come down here, and I do a then, and I'll go over here, and I'll say this is going to be my story. And I'll say console.log story. Now it's going to be author.get. And I go over here and I say console.log and my editor .get. And you see here's prof and Mitch.
Well, this is a good illustration of why you would have two aliases.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Right.
So you don't have to have all these tables all over the place.
So you don't, right, well, I mean, look, we know how we would set up the database structure. The question is, well, you might not know. You should know a little bit about database structures if you're using SQLize, or else it's a little bit too much of a black box. But we could sort of imagine, we've got these users, and these users could be both authors and editors. Now, look, this doesn't say that we wouldn't have some other business logic that could be violated here. It could very well be that we have a column in the author table called allow editing, okay? Which means that you're not allowed to be an editor. We're going to prevent you from being an editor. This is all logic that you could take care of, that again, you could end up doing through SQLize and hooks, or you could put it in your business logic. Again, whatever ends up making sense. I don't want to go in what I'm getting at here is I'm just trying to sort of show you a little bit of this at a time. Let's just think about a couple of different things here. Let's say that we wanted to find out if a particular user was the editor or the author of a story. So let's just say that we've got Mitch. I'm going to put a variable out here because I want to use it a little bit later on. So I'm going to say let Mitch, right? You start to see also a little bit ES66 syntax. I want to fill this up a little bit later. So I'm going to pull this out. And when I do my spread here, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to specify, I'm going to put this in an underscore, and I'll say Mitch equals underscore Mitch. Why am I doing that here? Well, let's just say for the sake of argument that I want it to do something like console.log, and I want to specify story is editor and put in Mitch. All right? That I would want to come out to true because, in fact, he is the editor. Right? Right now, if I go to run this, this will fail because my user object, right, does not, excuse me, my story object does not have an isEditor method. So what I could do here is I could go up here and go to my story. And instance methods are kind of simple here. See you later? All right. I could go over here and say, here's my story. And I could say is editor. Okay? Now, I'm going to show you that I've got to do function for this. And I told you I would give you a demo of why. And I'll show you that in a little bit. But I'm going to go over here. And what I'm going to pass in here is going to be, I could call it user. And I could just return, hey, look, is this editor ID equal to the user's ID? Then I know that they're going to be the editor. IsEditor is not a function. So common mistake. These are my instance methods. Well, you should have. You know what? I say don't interrupt me, but if I make a mistake, please. So I go over here, and that should now be solved. And should say true, right? On the same token, if I go over here, also, do you see here, we're not really building an app, but we're really exploring something and learning something. Again, without necessarily going into the browser, refresh, do I have this working? I have to worry about body parts. No, just focusing on a small piece. We're taking a little bit of a deeper dive here. And we could go over here. And if I go over here, I could say prof equals underscore prof. And I could go over here and say story is editor. Excuse me, is editor. I'm going to do one more thing, and we're going to look at context, and also we'll look at many-to-many. Okay? I want to show you one other thing here. Let's just say that for the sake of argument, I decide, hey, look, what I really want to do here is I want to go over here, and I want to find all of the stories that I have written. Okay? So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say, well, I have my user, find by ID. I've got my prof ID. Okay? And I also want to find everything, I'll say everything that I edited. Okay? Well, how do I do that? Well, I'm going to do my find by ID. But I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to specify that I'm going to do a include, right? And so my include here is going to be story. And I have a little problem here. If I do that, it'll tell me that story is not associated with a user. Don't forget, a story could be associated with a user a couple of different ways. So I could say a user has many stories. Okay? Excuse me, has many story. Okay? This is going to get a little bit confusing, right? So I could go over here, and what I really need to do is I need to be somewhat explicit. as to where this relationship is. So I don't think I can just do an as. I don't think that that's going to work. I think really what I need to do is to say a user has many stories, okay? And I can say as edited stories, and I can specify that in order to find out which stories the user ended up editing, my foreign key in here is going to be editor ID. Let's just see what happens here. Again, this doesn't change. Let's be clear. These give me my foreign keys. I don't need to alter my database at all. What I just need to do is I need to do an include to find all the stories that I ended up editing. Okay? So I'm going to call these my edited stories. I'm specifying what my foreign key is in that table. It needs to know that. What this should be give me the ability to do is not to include a story, but just to go in the reverse direction. What do I want to include? My model, which is going to be story, okay? And what did I call these? Edited stories? Let's just call it edited. As edited. And let's go up here and change this to edited. These are the stories that I edited. Okay? Now, what does that end up buying me? Well, if I end up coming down here, I've now returned from here. This is going to give me a then user. And what this should give me is that if I say console.log user.edited.length, I've edited one story, right? 0 stories. Okay.
No, you didn't edit Mitch.
Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, so let's do Mitch. Oof. Ah. So we end up doing Mitch, and Mitch comes back as having one story. And if I go over here and I say console.log user edited 0.get, I'll see that Mitch did a terrific job because he edited the my foo story. Okay? So the point is that, and by the way, let's just make sure that I got this correct. Do I need a foreign key? Maybe it guesses it. I don't know. I don't think so. I think it has to know the foreign key. Yeah.
That edited quote is almost like a tag for this foreign key.
Yeah, well, again, it's going to basically, what it's saying is that what do you want to call this relationship? What it's saying is that if you're sitting there with a user, and we know the user has many stories, what do you want to call that property? And we want to call it edited. Those are the stories that I ended up editing. Okay? Again, if there were multiple things that I could edit, maybe I would say, hey, look, it's edited stories, and I've got edited workshops, and I've got edited this.
Or what? You could add another one.
That's exactly right. We could do that as well. So if I do foreign key, this is going to be editor ID. Again, this way it knows how to call that relationship. On the same token, it would be totally legit to go over here and say has many stories as authored, yes, thank you. Authored, and the foreign key is going to be author ID. Again, guys, SQLize gets complicated, okay? It's complicated, but start out simple, okay? And it gets complicated, but I'll tell you something. It's less complicated than writing your own SQL. All right? So, again, this is not going to end up breaking anything. Okay, let me do something else here that I told you I was going to end up doing, and then we'll end up looking at, let's do a quick many-to-many. So let's say that we decide to do another model. Actually, there was one other thing that I wanted to do. I want to show you another instance method. Let's just pretend that we're going to decide whether an author has edited anything. So let's say I want to say console.log, and I want to say Mitch has edited. Now, this depends on how you want to do this, okay? I might operate under the assumption that, hey, look, if you're going to call has edited, make sure that you end up populating this part of the model, okay? I'm not looking at this as something that's going to be asynchronous. I'm basically saying you have a populated user, have this method called has edited, and if I come up here and I decide to do this, I could add instance methods, and I could say has edited. And this is going to be a function. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, hey, look, you know what? Don't bother. If you come here, right, and you're not passing me anything for edited, it's not filled with anything, I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to throw, you must populate edited. This is an assumption that I'm making. This is something that is going to deal with business logic. I'm assuming, hey, look, if you call this, I don't want to make other database calls, okay? Come at me with this thing populated, and I'm going to throw you an error. It's up to you to do it that way. And I'll go over here, and I'll say, otherwise, okay, we're going to end up returning this .edited.length greater than 0. You've edited something, okay? So now I look at this, and my console. Let's just see something. No, I think it's up here, right? Select ID name. Let's see what's console logging here. Hold on. Let's comment these out. Okay, it looks like, so what am I not doing here? Mitch has edited. Is editor, I'm sorry. Probably an error there that is not getting caught because it's inside of it then. Has edited. Has edited. Let's do a catch. Am I not returning anything? It's doing the select. Oh, wait a second. Say it again?
When you change the name, I think you modify the instance of the story.
Oh, thank you. Whew. Okay, I knew something was wrong there. Thank you. So I'm going to take this out, and let me put it up here. Right, this is on the user. Has edited. User has edited. No, I don't. This is not right. What am I doing here? No, hold on. No, that was. All right. I'm getting myself confused. Okay. This was on the story. We had is editor, right? is editor. Here, we want to do an instance method of has edited, right? On the user themselves. So if we go down here, Mitch has edited. See if this is even being hit. Let's console log our exception too. User find by ID Mitch, include story. Is this even being called here? Let's see. Yeah, I got a feeling I'm not making it down that far. That's possible. Say it again. Story find by ID. Let's back up for a second. Let's first do a console log of Mitch. Get. Okay, so we've got Mitch. Oh, you know what we don't have? Why does it look like we don't have his stories? Let's say Mitch edited dot length. Ah, okay. I think I might have changed something accidentally. So Mitch edited. It looks like I am including story as edited. I might have changed something up here. Or let me back up for a sec, because that definitely was working before, right? Cannot read property length of undefined. Oh, no, that looks right. Find by ID, include model story as edited.
179, that's probably the error.
This is the error, right? This is going to be undefined. Am I nuts, or was that working before?
You did put a throw in there.
Wait, you saw it. Until you got to the user function. User instant.
Let's say user let's just let me oh wait. No, that looks right. Let's back off this a little bit. Let's just see. Get rid of the instance methods on user. Still undefined. Story as editor, user find model story as edited. Editor ID. I'm going to look into that. All right. I'm not sure of the answer to that. Let me look at one other thing here. Well, that's going to bother me. All right. All right, since we're recording, let's look at one other thing. And then let's take a break. We'll figure that out, and I'll look at the many-to-many. So one thing that I want you to sort of realize with why we don't use the fat arrow syntax in this situation, let me give you sort of a simple example. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a const, and I'm going to call this foo. And I'm going to say console.log bar. So if I go over here and I create some object, and I say object, and I give it an ID. I'll give it an ID of 3. So if I was to go over here and say, hey, by the way, object foo is equal to foo, and not only am I going to log bar here, but I'm also going to add to it this ID, right? So object has an ID of 3, and I'm going to specify now, hey, look, object foo. And let's get rid of this, some stuff here at the top. Let's say console.clear. So you can see, first of all, that what I've got here is just this sort of naked function that has no context to this. And what I could do, if I want this to work, what you might think you could do is to say, hey, look, don't use foo, but do me a favor, bind it to this object so it could find its ID. But it's still undefined, right? Binding changes the context. So fat arrows don't really give you at least the way that I see it, don't allow you to change the context. But if you go over here and you get rid of the syntax and you make it a regular function, then you have the ability to bind it. No matter what you do with the fat arrow,
If you didn't bind it, would it still work?
no, absolutely not. So now it's bound. If we don't bind it and we do this, am I lying? I guess it still works because it is on that object. That's sort of surprising. Because it's the object that's calling it. I guess one of the other things you could do is you could say, you could also control the context. So let's say I say foo bound, okay, equals foo dot bind to object, right? Now I have this foo bound function, and I could call foo bound, right? And I get 3. If I didn't end up binding this and I just call foo, right, then I get bar undefined. If I have this as a fat arrow, let's see what the fat arrow if it lets me do it. I don't think it will. So if I have the fat arrow, I really have no ability to do any binding. And that's really the problem that you have, because internally, when you end up doing these instance methods, it ends up wanting to do some binding after you set up these instance methods. That's the reason why you can't end up using those fat arrows. Let's take a little bit of a break, and we'll come back. We'll look at many-to-many, and we'll also figure out why that was not working. All right, so that was a little frustrating. I kept on getting undefined here, and the reason why I'm getting it is just probably something you see if you're watching this now, is that I actually wanted to access user instead of Mitch, in which case I could end up getting the edited dot length or the edited 0 dot name. All right, let's wrap that up.